Here it is. Learn the truth about slavery. The left doesn't want you to know. White men led the world into slavery. I hate this stuff, dude. I hate it. Dude, I hate talking about... I just noticed the PragerU thing is like a P. But it looks like it's a test for like measles or mumps or something. It's really good logo design, guys.
Gooberton_ just resubscribed.
Thank you so much for the
2
resub.
months.
Let's watch Candace Owens talk about this stuff. Alright, it's PragerU. Oh, you can't even hear it. That's honestly, watching this on fucking mute is probably our best bet, but we're gonna watch it with the volume. How do you turn it up or down? It's just one static volume. Amazing fucking service, guys.
And now for a brief history of slavery. Here's the first thing you need to know.
Okay.
Slavery was not invented by white people. It did not start in 1619 when the first slaves came to Jamestown.
Sure.
It existed before then.
I think the biggest criticism of this video isn't gonna be like the facts that they present. It's gonna be like the why. Why are we talking about this? You know, maybe I guess as a reaction to like critical race theory and stuff. But I feel like it just comes off more as like, oh, white people are innocent. You know, like, we didn't create slavery. We're not the only ones who have made practices. And like, yeah, I think that we have led the world in like less oppressive tactics, but it feels too like whites. Like, I did it. I'm a white, like white saviory. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, it's just a little too white saviory. That's the problem here. That's going to be the issue of this video.
It did not start in 1492 when Columbus discovered the New World. In fact,
I feel like every civilization just enslaved everybody. Like, you know, you saw like the Vikings going and like enslaving what, English people? I don't really know. You know what I mean? And then like all these people were enslaving other of their own people. I think that the better conversation to have though is around chattel slavery, because a lot of people misrepresent chattel slavery. And chattel slavery is the idea of enslaving someone's like entire bloodline, basically, rather than just the individual. And a lot of people will say that that's something that white people invented, but it's actually she's just right-wing Vosh. not in the lie. I know. Where did you get that? Where did you get that from? Who do you watch that said that? Because I feel like I've heard that before. But anyway, what was I going to say? Oh, chattel slavery, to my understanding, actually started in like the Middle East. That's the furthest back that we can track that, and they still exist today in the Middle East. So it's very interesting. That would be a better conversation, but in an informative way that like reduces, because when you actively lie about a group of people, like, you're being racist. If you attribute chattel slavery to white people, which we did engage in it, you're being racist because you're just wrong, and so you just want to hate white people. But this, again, comes off very, like, white saviory. Yeah, it was Sitch and Adam. Yep, I like them, too. They're pretty good. Yep, I actually just started watching some of their stuff.
Explorer landed in the Bahamas. The native Taino tribe hoped that he would help them defeat their aggressive neighbors, the Caribs. The Caribs enslaved the Taino and, on occasion, served them for dinner. Slavery existed in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The word slave actually comes from the Slavs of Eastern Europe. Millions of them, all white by the way, were captured and enslaved by Muslims in the 9th century and later by the Ottoman Turks. Okay. Slavery existed when the Roman Empire controlled the Mediterranean and most of Europe from the 1st through the 5th centuries. Slavery existed when Alexander the Great conquered Persia in the 4th century BC.
Okay.
It was so common that Aristotle simply considered it natural. The slave-master model was just how the world operated in the great philosopher's day.
Yeah.
Slavery existed during the time of the ancient Egyptians 5,000 years ago. As far back as we can go in human history, we find slavery. As renowned historian John Steele Gordon notes from time immemorial, slaves were a major item of commerce. As much as a third of the population of the ancient world was enslaved. Here's the second thing you need to know. White people were the first to formally put an end to slavery.
Okay.
In 18...
Okay. What's the word formally mean? You know, like, it sounds like very calculated language. Because, like, who did it informally first? You know what I mean? Like, who was the first informal person to get rid of slavery? Probably wasn't white people, I would imagine.
1933, Britain was the first country in the history of the world to pass a Slavery Abolition Act. They were quickly followed by France, who in 1848 abolished slavery in her many colonies. Then, of course, came the 13th Amendment in the United States Constitution. After centuries of human slavery, white men led the world in putting an end to the abhorrent practice.
I just, like, you know what really bothers me about this is, like, well, we already talked about how it's very white savory. But from a conservative perspective, and I'm not like a conservative, but this is the general conservative perspective, like more of like an actual reasonable conservative, not just a like far right-wing idiot. Reasonable conservatives, like, they don't really see race. So their perspective wouldn't be like white men led the world and putting an end to slavery. It would be like the first world, like the Western civilization did that. Like the fact that you're saying it's because they're white, I just don't think that it's because they're white. I just think it's because white people happen to be the people who got access to different resources that made them able to generate wealth and like education, et cetera, and they are, and like first world people are leading the world in less oppressive whatever. You get my point. I think you guys understand what I'm saying. But I wouldn't like say, yeah, it's white people. It's like, nah, I would just say it's like Western people. That's what I would say. Like, what? I feel like the whole point, like one of the conservative perspectives, is like, I don't see race. I understand where that can be ignorant when it comes to the specific issues of marginalized groups, but it's like I don't see race because race doesn't matter anymore. To me, when we talk about white privilege, I consider that more of like a privilege of people who've never been oppressed for their skin color, which can happen to anybody. It just happens to white people more. And so they just don't see race. Like, that's what it is. And so, like, this just seems so counterintuitive to the general conservative ideology of race isn't a thing, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't need to be a factor. Would I buy Candace Owens OnlyFans? Why do you guys ask me these questions?
That includes the 300,000 Union soldiers, overwhelmingly white, who died during the Civil War.
And that's unfortunate. But also, my understanding, and maybe this is just some like conspiracy shit, but my understanding is like the war was less about abolishing slavery and more about crippling the South because the South had a ton of slaves. And it was trying to weaken the South. And so that kind of supports the narrative that anytime black people get rights in America, it's not because they are supposed to get rights. It's because it benefits whatever elite that's in a power. Like, oh, let's end slavery because we want to cripple the South. Okay. Oh, let's give black people rights because we look really hypocritical in the Vietnam War trying to spread democracy when we don't even have freedom at home. You know? It's just... That's what I'm talking about. It just doesn't talk about, like, dude, this paints the Civil War in such like a really positive way. Like, oh yeah, these white people killed themselves just to free black people. It's like, did they though? You know, ending slavery was like a byproduct. Yeah, it just seemed like it was like the excuse to engage in a war. It's like human rights, let's have a war. But it was really about, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just saying.
Now, am I saying that this makes white people better than anyone else? Of course not.
You kind of are trying to say that without saying it. I do think so. Like, but you're going to say no.
My purpose here is to simply tell the truth. And the truth is that human history is complicated.
That's
no
true.
one, regardless of skin color, stands guiltless.
That's true. That's fair.
Yet today we are never told to consider the murderous Persian Empire or the cannibalism of indigenous tribes of North and South America, or the heinous actions under the imperialistic Muslim, Chinese, Mongol, or Japanese empires, to name just a few. Instead, we're told that slavery is a white phenomenon.
I find it to be a little questionable that when you brought up all those different groups that engage in oppressive tactics, some of which still do, of course, that you didn't bring the white ones up as well. You know what I mean? Like, if I was gonna say, like, yeah, we shouldn't just focus on like the horrible history of like white people and Catholicism. We should also focus on the history of like other whatever. You understand my point? But you kind of, it's like, I know it's nitpicky, but it's these subtle, small things that we forget to acknowledge that tell the story of like white people are better. Maybe I'm reaching. That's just the way that I'm interpreting it.
And like all persistent lies, this lie spawns a bunch of other lies. On social media, I come across extraordinary depictions about how Africans lived like pharaohs before Europeans came and
I honestly have never seen that.
laid waste to their paradise.
Where are you seeing that? Like on conservative fucking propaganda machines on Instagram? You know what I mean? Like I've come across those. Bro, I remember for a period of time, I wasn't even a conservative, but I would get like conservative fucking like, did you know that Joe Biden is actually not president and Donald Trump and Joe Biden switched faces so that Donald Trump is currently the president right now, and then the Trump that we actually know is actually Joe Biden and he's gonna go to jail. It's like those are the pages that she's seeing this on.
I wish any of this were true, but it's not. It's a fantasy.
Face off.
The truth is that Africans were sold into slavery by other black Africans,
That
and in
is
many
true,
cases
yeah.
sold for items as trivial as gin and mirrors.
Okay.
Whites didn't go into the interior and round up the natives.
Well, you're still bad for buying them. Like, let's not pretend that you're not. You know, it's like if I bought like something I knew was stolen, it's like, yeah, let's say I went and I robbed a house, and like I fucking went in there, I robbed the house, I stole their shit, and I sold to a guy, and he's like, where'd you get this stuff from? I was like, oh, I robbed the house. Like, okay, I'm still gonna buy it. Like, you're still an asshole. You know, you're arguably just as much of an asshole as I am. So like, shut the fuck up, bro.
They waited on the coast for their black partners to bring them black bodies. The stark reality is that our lives had very little value to our ancestors.
That part's true.
Here's
I feel like
the
we don't talk about that a lot. It's like life was so worthless back in the day, bro. You just throw bodies at things until they were built. Like that was how we built the pyramids. That's crazy as human beings.
Third thing you need to know. If you think slavery is a relic of the past, you're wrong. There are some 700,000 slaves in Africa today.
There's
White.
also slaves in America as well. You should talk about that. It really depends on your definition of slavery. It's called modern day slaves. But we obviously have less slaves in America than other places, but it's usually referring to people who are sex trafficked through America. Stuff like that. So it's just good to now. I think that in Africa there's probably, did I say in Africa? I don't know. There's sex trafficked in America. In Africa, I'm sure that there are more like traditional. Well, yeah, it's like mostly sex trafficking. Maybe they're more traditional in other countries. Yeah.
Right now, that's the lowest estimate that I could find. Other sources say there are many more. For context, that's almost twice as many slaves as were ever brought to the United States.
See, this is like I don't like this context. I hate when we do stuff like that because you got to think about it, right? So what she said is like, hey, there's more slaves now in Africa, like a massive continent, than there ever was in America. Or there's twice as many now than there used to be. But it's like, yeah, but like if you look at the population growth over the past 200 years, it was fucking insane. You know, like I don't know the specific. I mean, you could look at the population growth. I guess we could just look it up. As far back as we can. I don't know if I'll be able to find it because we haven't been recording it forever. But if you look up, yeah, I think we started in like the 1920s, 50s, I don't know. But we're at like 330 million, right? And back in 1950, we're at 158 million. So we've more than doubled over the past 71 years. So now just imagine going back even further. And my point is that there weren't as many people that lived 200 years ago when slavery, or 300 years ago when slavery was in America. So of course the numbers are going to be very different because there's just more people in general. You know what I mean? So it's like out of context. But what's the relation? What's the percentage, or the relative amount of slaves to people? That makes more sense to talk about.
Child soldiers, human trafficking, forced labor. These are the conditions that currently exist.
Hey, capitalism creates forced labor, dude. We have everybody in America is actually a slave, bro.
Sub-Saharan region where the transatlantic slave trade originated. African bodies are being sold today like they were sold then. And no, they are not being purchased by any country of white men. In fact, slavery...
Well, no, but we could talk about how, like, we do have a country of white men. We definitely do, get some of our stuff through African countries, and we like utilize their slave labor to make shit. It's true. I think there's a whole thing. Was it Bill Nye? I forget who did it. But when it comes down to it, like, there's nothing you could buy in America that didn't have like oppression touching it. You know what I mean? So like we do kind of encourage those practices because we get cheaper shit. So if you really gave a fuck about those people in Africa, you would be like, yeah, we should raise the prices of our goods. And pay those people better in other countries. But, you know, that's why we have, like, the whole name of blood diamonds and shit, you know?
By any traditional definition, is exclusively practiced today within non-white countries.
See, like how she says by, like, notice what she said.
Are being sold today like they were sold then. And no, they are not being purchased by any country of white men. In fact, slavery, by any traditional definition.
So she used the words by any traditional definition for a very specific reason. When she was back earlier in the video,
Native.
The people that she pointed out,
that's almost twice.
The people that she pointed out here are actually all non-traditional slaves, right? So, usually slavery was like encompassed of like forced labor, but she brought up a bunch of different people. Like you wouldn't traditionally consider like a child like militant to be a slave. So she's using the modern day definition of slavery when it comes to the African countries.
Exclusively.
But then when she fast forwards to talk about white countries, she says the traditional definition. So she's being very, you know, I guess the word would be duplicitous here in order to push this narrative. Like we have modern day slaves here as well. We just talked about it. Is it as much? No, of course. Our country's better because America is the greatest country in the world. But we still engage in shitty practices.
Practice today within non-white countries. But we hear almost nothing about that. Just like we hear nothing about how slavery was universal until good people in Europe and America ended it 2 centuries ago. Why?
You forgot to say good old white folks, Candace. You forgot to say that. You got to push that narrative that white people are the greatest, you know?
Because our so-called leaders, black and white, wouldn't profit from it. Black victimhood is nothing if not profitable.
I suppose there's some truth to that, I guess, but I feel like, bro, I feel like the real world and the fucking internet world are crazy. Like, yeah, we have crazy, like, race realist, insane people on both sides in, like, the political world. Most people are pretty normal, bro. You know, most people are just trying to fucking work and be left alone. And Candace Owens just keeps harassing black people. Just let people fucking work, man.
It elects politicians and funds racial grievance groups. And if black Americans began to view themselves as partners in the American dream, if we embraced the patriotic spirit that holds all men are created equal, the patriotic spirit that is our real heritage, then the race hustlers would soon be out of business.
Well, the problem, though, is that you're not really... Her face, she looks like a fucking frog here. The problem here, though, is like I actually do like the idea of loving America. I think we should like teach, you know, we should love America. We should teach the correct history of America and not try to sensationalize our like the positive nature of what we've done. But the problem, though, is that so we have a lot of left-leaning groups talking about, I guess you'd call whatever she said before, more like reparation type practices for black Americans and other marginalized groups. But then the conservative response is just go fuck yourself. Let's just cut taxes. But a lot of those people rely on a robust welfare state. So it's not actually a viable option to just get rid of welfare and cut taxes. It's just not. Especially with technology displacing jobs and driving down wages. Like, you really do need to redistribute wealth, and that's why I'm a UBI guy. But my point is it's not like you're coming up with like an intelligent solution. If you look at Milton Friedman, that's an intelligent solution, like a negative income tax. That's a decent idea. Wealth redistribution for poor people. Because you really need to focus on poor people rather than like black people for multiple reasons. First and foremost, I think that even if reparations probably is ideal for black Americans, even if that is ideal, and it probably is, just because it's ideal for black people doesn't mean it's ideal for the whole country, you know? And so that's just a reality, you know, is that something that's good for 13% of the population? Is that good for the other 87%? And even if it is, do you think it's actually going to get voted in? Probably not. But then also, like, why just focus on poor black people? What about poor white people? What about poor Hispanic people? My thing is when it comes down to it, everybody can identify with different forms of oppression. But that doesn't make you oppressed, right? Like, I have ADHD, I have OCD, I have Tourette's, my mother left me, I have a tiny penis. You know, we have all these different things that I guess I'm fat, but that's kind of oppressing myself, oppressing my arteries. But these are all different forms of oppression. But I'm doing well in society, so I wouldn't consider myself oppressed. And obviously, my skin color isn't a factor. Now, I'm sure that there are areas where white people's skin color is a factor for their oppression. It's very unlikely. But this guy in my chat's like, yeah, you're obese. Like, before I even said I was fat, he's like, you're obese, too. I'm like, okay. Thank you for reminding me. But when it comes down to it, you know, if you're poor, there's really 2 or I guess 3 reasons you're poor. Either you're oppressed, you're lazy, or a mixture between the both. And so we don't know if it's because you're lazy or if it's because you're oppressed, because I don't think that we have a strong enough poverty floor to make that distinction. If we did a better poverty floor, if we gave poor people more opportunities, and I think that financial opportunities are the best. Again, UBI, I'm really more for just money instead of programs, because I think that our country has shown us that we're fucking dumb when it comes to programs. So the way I would do it is like, yeah, let's do wealth redistribution. It'll bring jobs to area, like UBI, everybody $1,000 a month, 18 over, brings people to the area. Brings more business to the area. You don't have to increase minimum wage drastically, so it doesn't hurt small businesses. So it's actually good for small businesses. It actually puts more money into that area, so they can spend more money on small businesses. But it also makes it so that the small business doesn't have to pay so much, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get it. And then once they have more money in the area, because you see more businesses come there and you see more robust job growth, those people can raise their own taxes for better schooling. So like that's a pretty reasonable solution. Like I said, Milton Friedman, conservative. Promoting of a negative income tax, which is a form of UBI. Some conservatives are for robust welfare states. They just don't like the conditionality of welfare. But like Candace Owens doesn't promote that. So you have like really bad ideas on the left, and the reaction from the right is to just more bad ideas. So if you're somebody that's like, hey, I think black people are oppressed, like what side are you going to lean towards? The one that's trying to come up with a bad solution, or the one that just says go fuck yourself if you're black? You know what I mean? And I feel like there's lies their problem. So it's not like you're giving us a viable solution here.
And who wants that? I'm Candace Owens, author of Blackout for Prager University.
You scare the fuck out of me. Dude, I before I was sitting here and somebody sent me this video, somebody sent me this meme before, and I was like, I should save this in case I want it, and I didn't save it, and now I regret it, but this is the meme, I just found it.
Oh my God! You so ugly, you look like an extraterrestrial from the Milky Way galaxy. God motherfucking damn!